Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kara Dooner. I'm a senior accounting major, and my presentation today is on the challenges to data analytics during a global pandemic. And my research was conducted with the help of Dr. Marian Rexer, who I know is here today. So I would like to extend my thank you to her for allowing me the opportunity for this project. So to begin today, I will be going through different methods of research. I will be identifying my problem and hypothesis for this study, followed by an analysis of previous studies completed relating to the topic, an independent research study that I completed this semester, and my conclusions and analysis. So first, I would like to begin with my problem identification and my hypothesis. So the problem that I identified for the purpose of this study was that the global pandemic has had adverse consequences on data analytics completed by businesses and the accounting industry in general. My hypothesis is that COVID-19 has impacted cost and resource allocation to data analytics in the accounting industry, as well as impacting industry standards. And my research method for this project was an analysis of two previous studies completed in 2020, as well as a survey that I created via Google Forms. So the first study that I would like to use as a comparison to my own study was from the British Journal of Management. And as I said, it was completed in early 2020. The title of the study was COVID-19 Pandemic in the New Era of Big Data Analytics, Methodological Innovations and Future Research Directions. So the British Journal of Management basically started doing an analysis right at the beginning of COVID, when it first started hitting the global scene and the United States. So they identified a lot of precautions and a lot of things that we could help in identifying ways to suppress the pandemic very early on. So I used a lot of their information just to kind of get a predictive analysis based on last year that I will use to now compare what I have gathered this year. So the different topics that they touched on was the future of work. They predicted that socioeconomic conditions, enhancements in technology, and a transition to remote working would be very prevalent throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. They also predicted changes in consumer behavior in examples of panic buying, like we're actually seeing right now with the gas line crisis, changing perceptions, hoarding, and supply and demand. And we can also see that during the gas line crisis that we currently have on the East Coast and in the South. They've also identified new markets. And as we can see, there's a transition from brick and mortar to online platforms for shopping. And they have and service innovation. They predicted that the travel, entertainment, tourism, and restaurant industries will struggle to keep pace with online markets. And as we can see today, that is a very prevalent issue. And moving on to some of their other items that they've identified, more on the operations and global networks. With their operations networks, they've identified that raw materials, finished goods, and the movement of people would be more difficult to manage during the pandemic. And the one example that I've provided, just as a side note in the raw materials, is the lumber industry. If everyone is familiar or knowledgeable about some of the industries that we're seeing in raw materials, the lumber industry has skyrocketed in their prices. And I know that from family being in the construction industry. So that was just one small example that I wanted to include as far as the British Journal of Management prediction and what's occurring right now. They've also predicted that the global value chain disruptions due to pandemic conditions, and they're expecting a transition from a historical costing method to current cost methods as the pandemic is just so unpredictable. Historical cost really can't help much during these times. And lastly, the British Journal of Management identified challenges in sustainability, governance, and public policy. And the one topic that I wanted to touch a little bit more on was the leveraging data analytics, which is playing a huge role in the internal auditing field. The leveraging data analytics allows auditors to manipulate data in order to predict and map out possible outcomes. And I think that's really important in what we're doing now in the accounting industry and in business in general, is just trying to predict and trying to outlook some of the possible projections for the future. And they've also identified that there's a need for a bridge between research and practice. It's great to have research, but putting your research into practice and trying to prevent certain circumstances from overtaking a business is really important as well. So the second study that I used for my comparison for my own research is the State of Accountants report, and that was conducted by Smart Vault in April of last year. And Smart Vault, if everyone isn't familiar, is an online document and file sharing software. And their State of Accountants report included over 1,100 professionals in the tax, accounting, and bookkeeping industry within 18 countries. And they focused on how successful firms are at navigating uncertain times to ensure business continuity. So their report was very lengthy, so I extracted some of the important parts that I wanted to focus on for my survey. And the first graph that I have here on the left is prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. They assessed how well firms were prepared for remote work. And as you can see, well over 50% were either very well prepared or already working from home, which I think is very important to note in the fact that the pandemic has increased the need for remote working, as we saw in earlier months and earlier this year. And at the end of last year, that a lot of businesses were plain shut down and needed to work from home. And some of the other key highlights from this section were prior to the pandemic, only 16% of companies did not have a cloud system for storage, which I think was very important because all of those companies that already had cloud systems were more easily transitioning into remote working. And also before the pandemic, 80% of companies offered online client portals, which I also believe was helpful in reducing the amount of clients that needed to be on site for meetings and account management and other sorts. And then the study also projected that professionals, from their professional testimony and expert testimony, the long-term effects would that there would be more remote working and a bigger technology dependency. And as we can see, that's very prevalent today. I'm sure many of us are still working from home, and students are still working from home a lot around the country. So in addition to the previous pandemic study that they conducted, they wanted to also assess how the transition to remote work has been. And as you can see on the right, a lot of companies had almost seamless transitions and close to seamless transitions to remote work. And some of the other key highlights from that section of their report were that over 50% of companies felt that they were well prepared to handle COVID-19. And the most difficult challenge that businesses in this study, that 62% reported, was that their businesses faced a challenge in continuing operations and keeping clients informed of all the changes that were occurring throughout the pandemic. So moving on to my independent research survey, I conducted a research survey with Dr. Rexer, and we sent it out to the database that Margaret Petty from the Center for Continued Learning. She had a database of about 1,200 accounting professionals, and that was what I used for my survey participants. So the survey participants were CPAs, tax accountants, and financial reporting specialists, along with a few other concentrations such as CFOs and lawyers, but it was primarily in the accounting industry. And 82% of the participants that responded to my survey had 20 plus years of experience across various industries, including public and private accounting, including banking, manufacturing, healthcare, real estate development, and all of the participants that participated were in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So my survey included qualitative and quantitative questions, and my qualitative questions, in which I just kind of left open-ended for professionals to share their own thoughts, related to the impact on their ability to collect, analyze, and trust data, changes in industry standards, the accuracy and reliability of data during the COVID-19 pandemic, and how changes occurred during the risk environment. And my quantitative data included the time to complete data analysis, the cost and resource allocation, and the changes in working from home and how that impacted companies. So my qualitative results, as I said, were more open-ended, so I could allow my participants to kind of share their own thoughts without being limited to an actual question. So a lot of the results that I received in my qualitative analysis included difficulty in estimating and budgeting due to uncertainty, adverse effects in data comparisons, slower processing, and operations were even temporarily halted in certain companies and industries, challenges in the disclosure of pandemic-related items in their financial statements and to their shareholders, a disproportionate rise in costs, a shift from historical cost method to the current and future cost methods, which the British Journal of Management had also touched upon, so their conclusions actually came true, And unbudgeted expenses led to loss of revenue, and changes in tax laws reflected the pandemic, including the PPP loans and the changes in unemployment, which are two topics that I had experience with firsthand at my internship this semester doing taxes. I saw how those two items had affected people's tax returns and their financial statements. So then my quantitative results, I wanted to focus on a few different areas. So my first question was that the COVID-19 had affected the costs and resources available for data analysis. And as you can see, I didn't get a large response out of the participants that I had shared my research with. So that's kind of why I had to backtrack to previous studies as well. But a large majority of the participants that did respond said that their resources and their costs were definitely affected. And everyone that had said yes had shared an increase between 10 and 50%. In addition to the costs and resource allocation, I had also asked the participants about the ability of working employees from home and how that affected their quality of data analytics. And as you can see, almost 55% of the participants noted that there was no effect on working from home, which I thought was very interesting because the Smart Vault response had 56% that were not severely affected. So I thought that that was a very good comparison, and that being a year later, it remained relatively the same. I thought that was very interesting in my findings because I expected that working from home would cause bigger issues, but it turns out that a lot of companies were already prepared for working from home. So my conclusions and analysis relating to this study is that COVID-19 definitely has had an immense impact on the accounting industry and the ability to perform data analytics. I also found that companies and industries of all types have seen an increase in time, resources, and costs needed to perform the data analytics due to the global pandemic. And my independent research agrees with the previous studies, predictions, and assessments in how the COVID-19 pandemic would affect business and the accounting industry. And then I just have my external resources, which are the two studies that I mentioned from the Smart Vault platform and from the British Journal of Management. And that concludes my presentation. So if anyone has any other questions, I'd be happy to take them.